there are times when the scale of what is transpiring in our surround requires some humbling. This is a quote. I'm not going to say that it's accurate, but in considering the scale of things, Earth is just one of 3.2 trillion planets in our galaxy. That's a few. Our sun is one of 200 billion stars in the Milky Way. The Milky Way, that's our particular galaxy. And the Milky Way is just one of 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe, which doesn't necessarily mean that what we observe is everything. Now, the universe. Let's bring it down to the Milky Way, our galaxy. Let's bring it down to our sun, the thing that provides us with the heat required to generate life here on this planet. One of 3.2 trillion. It's a lot. But let's bring it down to here we are on this little blue speck in our particular solar system. Let's bring it down even a little further. Here we are living on the surface of this blue pearl in space. Let's bring it down a little further. Here, in the United States of America, we have a substantial, if not serious, political cabal that is attempting to exert an imbalance of control that is attempting to separate us one from another in no uncertain terms, so that this cabal can continue to exploit the physical elements of this planet to such an extent that we're pushing rather substantially at the ability of humanity to continue to survive on this planet. Those in this cabal and its tentacles stretching out are so steeped in the economic scenario that they have a control over the majority of the money that exists. But that isn't enough. Because the recognition, if you just contemplate it, is that there are likely too many people on the planet for the system that exists right now. We aren't sharing what it is that's available in an equitable fashion. And because of that, the environment is being hard pressed to be able to sustain the trajectory that we as humanity are on. I know this isn't just a minor consideration. And the things that are transpiring politically here in this country right now are really out of balance in that same scenario. Not necessarily the easiest things to meditate upon. But at the same time, I think we need to be aware of what the footprint of humanity is creating. We're in the season of Aquarius now. If you look at this chart, we have Mars and Pluto, the Sun, Mercury, Venus, all in Aquarius. Aquarius is the potential melting pot of a society. It is the cauldron within which we engage with one another at the collective level. This is not just the one-on-one level. That is part of it, but at the collective level. Here is our query, if you will, into potentially meaningful avenues within which we might aspire to a more cohesive sharing of what it is that we have come to engage in. And Aquarius is on the table right now. For every one of us, you might say, well, I'm not an Aquarius. We all have an Aquarius part. It may at times appear to, wander a little further out into the hinterlands than at some times. Currently, we're all, each and every one of us, are being asked to, dip our toes in at least into this Aquarian arena to feel, sense, if you will, the potential that we share with one another, engaging in the life dance. This week, part of the reason that I am coming into this astrological consideration beyond the weekend that just passed is because the energetic imbalance of what is transpiring here on planet Earth right now has had me doing some serious soul conscious searching. Is there a value in the astrological dance that I, as an astrologer, can bring into the equation of what it is that I share every week that carries enough of the energetic query into this life dance that we all signed up for. Yeah, you may try to, not agree with that, but we did. Back in the 90s, I was licensed to and did install septic systems as part of my business package. There was a septic system that came along in the late 90s, and it was called the TURD, T-U-R-D, 2000. You go, classic name for a septic system. What it did was it had two septic tanks. The first one was your basic septic tank, like all of us that live out in the wilderness still have, rather than sewer systems, which is, civilization's answer. And the second septic tank had a churning motor in it that, recirculated and allowed the effluent to settle, and then it would pump the effluent by a UV light once it was settled, and you could put a tap on the end of that, and that water would be available to use for your garden. They stated you could drink that water, but of the 40 of us that were there observing this system that they were showing us, no one stepped forward and volunteered to taste it. But the key that I want to bring up for you is that the modern septic sewer systems make everything black water. You can't use it for anything because you don't have any idea what impurities are in it. And I think that's a apt analogy of what the current political systems are about. They are in the creation of black water so that their economic holdings will be strengthened within the cabal, but not for the rest of us. We have to survive on the black water. I'm bringing up some rather challenging considerations for this week's chatter. And the reason I'm doing it is because there are planetary challenges that exist for this week that have to do with what it is that we, as the population, the majority of us, need to factor into our everyday living experience to get a hold of the rudder of civilization in an effective enough way that we can alter it, maybe only just a little at a time. But altering the trajectory that we're on is required right now. Let's go back to our astrology. This is Monday. Mars here. 2 degrees 33 minutes of Aquarius. Pluto. 3 degrees 31 minutes of Aquarius. This is one of the two main aspects this week are bringing for us. And Mars takes, it, depending on the retrograde dance that it does occasionally, it takes, a year and something in order to go around the zodiac. Which means that if you consider that from about 2008 to 2025, Pluto, our next door planet here in this consideration, was going through the sign of Capricorn. And about every, not quite 2 to up to 2, a little less than 2 years, Mars would come around and be holding hands with Pluto. And it did this about 7 or 8 times during that 2008 to 2025 cycle. It's going to do it again during the Aquarius cycle. But let's just consider Mars as the god of war. An impulsive, driving energy that wants to accomplish something. In an exchange of energy with Pluto, the god of the underworld, that, can, in some definitions, dip one's toes into the field of death. Now, death is not one of those topics that we in the Western culture are wont to give too much energy to. As a matter of fact, our Western culture has done everything that it can to shield us from a consideration of what death is. And it's so obtuse that a version of death that terrifies each and every one of us is sitting right at the top of the pile of this definition for death. And we don't want to, we've been trained to fear it. It's a natural process of the living experience. It happens to everything. From the smallest worm under the earth to the most enormous mountains on our planet are all going through this process of change. Now, it might take a little longer for the mountain than the worm to experience this transition, but it's going to happen to everything. We humans, we're in that mix. And depending on your definition or awareness of the life cycle that we humans have, you're either going to be so enamored in the dynamics of your everyday living experience that being able to perceive the potential for a life process that has been and will continue to be ongoing forever. And we, as participants in this dance, have an opportunity to see ourselves as, just momentary flashes in this life experience and trying to make everything that we can of it while we're here in this physical realm, without the recognition that death comes along, as it always does. Death has been one of my spiritual allies for quite a lot of years. Somewhere along the way, in one of our conversations, death reminded me of its function. And believe it or not, here's what death said. You know, the reason that I'm here is to remind you to live. That's the main function of death. It is here to remind you that there is a cycle to this living experience that goes through periodic terminations at the physical level, but not at the life level. Our soul and spirit is infinite. And to hold ourselves back from really living each moment to its fullest in some level of fear and terror that death might be stalking us. It is. It always is. To remind you what it means to be alive. Back to our astrology. Death and war. Death and war. Options, but not necessarily a guarantee. While death and war, Mars and Pluto, were going through the sign of Capricorn, the arena of governance, leadership, meaningful context of what a society should be about, could be about. 7 or 8 times the war god and the god of the underworld came together. And if you consider that time period from 2008 to 2025, or many of the time frames of that many years where these two planets were tickling each other, how many may have sensed the edge of a potential climatic termination point being close to the surface at the political level? Now we're going to do this dance until about 2043, 2044 of Pluto going through Aquarius. And Mars is going to do that same kind of dance every couple years, a little less, where it's going to be holding hands with Pluto in the environment of cultural, collective engagement. It would behoove us to be aware that each time this transpires, and it transpires exactly on Tuesday of this week, we have to make choices. Now, this Tuesday is it's a Mars day, but it's the exact conjunction of these two. On the larger scale of things, we go through most of this week and part of this last weekend with these two energies tickling each other, asking us, are you ready to change? Because the type of change that Pluto represents is total transmutation, transubstantiation of being one thing in a minute and something very different in the next minute. And how Pluto does this is it continuously provides an invitation through the, what shall we call it, the regurgitation of stuff that has been buried out of sight from us, buried in the earth, if you will. Yeah, that's where Tartarus, has said to have been. I sometimes wonder if perhaps there are versions of the hell realms that actually exist in our everyday living experience. And the reason why is because some of us have invited that essence up to be in interchange within and around our living experiences. It's a choice. But when that happens, the choice says, are you going to be lessened? Ooh, wow, that's an interesting term. Because I could see it as something, being minimized, lessened. Or at the same time, it is a lesson. Something that is in the opportunity of learning something. And in this circumstance, I think that both of those versions of lesson are relevant. So during our next 7 or 8 times of Mars holding hands with Pluto, from now until 2043, the question will continue to come up. And you have to ask yourself, what version of the death scenario and the life scenario am I going to tune into? Am I going to be demeaned by a version of death that has a terminal quality to it? Or am I going to be feeling the exuberance of a life dance that in this moment is the here and now? On this level, this, physical level, that I want to fill up so that when, that death comes tapping on the windowsill, I have lived well, and I am ready to release this physical vehicle that has allowed my spirit and soul to exchange with the environment and those within it in the best opportunity that I can, so that as I transition into the next level of, you guessed it, life, it always goes on. That spirit soul that I have grown through this physical environmental process is ready to expand even more. this week with Mars and Pluto coming together. That's the kind of question that's on the front burner. When I look at the Sabian symbol for that, 3 degrees of Aquarius. I have read this before, but I'm just going to give you the quick excerpt. A Hindu yogi demonstrates his healing powers. Healing is a big topic and has a lot to do with your perspective on the life dance. The keynote: a disciplined use of spiritual energies in restoring the natural harmony disturbed by man's inharmonic attempts to transcend nature through mind. There's a potential confusion between brain and mind. Brain, that gray intertwined matter within our ears, between our ears, has been given a position of supreme authority by a lot of humanity, whereas mind is a much larger container within which the brain dwells, we dwell, and has the potential for an interactive quality to it with all the aspects of living life. It represents our connection to the whole gamut of this living dance we are a part of. Whereas the brain, it can be, cajoled, manipulated, challenged in so many ways to define a small package within which it will exist that's different from everything else around it. Mind is there to remind us of our connection to all of life. The brain is trained by our peers, by our teachers, to limit itself. Spirit doesn't recognize those limitations. There's a fullness to that process. I know I'm getting a little carried away with this Mars-Pluto dance, but that's a biggie, That's starting us on a trajectory until 2043, where it's going to continue to come back to our cultural process that our collective needs to, in some fashion, find a cogent exchange of energy that we can share with one another, that will continue to allow our growth at a spiritual level to be an invitation one to another. On this very same day, Neptune, that level of unlimited creative imagination, has finally come back into the sign of Aries, that initiation point where something new it's just right there. It isn't necessarily known. That's how new this 0 degrees Aries point is. It's like waking up from a cycle. If you think of the chart as a cycle, this circle rotating around, the planets going around there, when they are finished with the Piscean dance of a creativity into spiritual levels of awareness, where the process of forming a seed as the results of the life process that is ready to be planted into the soil so something new can be born. That's Pisces. Aries comes along. I am the soil, the potentially fertile ground, offering substance, sustenance to what it is that seed that was developed in the previous cycle can be born into. This is a magic moment if tuned into appropriately. Neptune, a level of unlimited creative potential, has just landed on this very same day that Pluto and Mars are considering the life-death dance in our collective. This Neptune coming into Aries asks us, what is it that the seed that you developed wants to grow into? And because it's Neptune, don't hold back the creative level and potential of where that can go. Can you feel that? This is a very dynamic and potentially interesting week that we're coming into. And also this week, the moon down here at 27 degrees of Taurus, holding hands with Uranus at 27 degrees of Taurus. During this day, the moon is basically has just come out of, actually, if we went to the previous day, on this previous day, or maybe the day before, we had our quarter moon, crisis in action. As the impulse diving into this week, I think the quarter moon was Sunday, asking us, is there appropriateness to what it is that you feel for that new moon that began at, I believe it was the 28 degrees maybe of Capricorn, while with a lot of other planetary signatures, which I've already talked about. But on this day, Tuesday, when all those other things are happening, the moon holding hands with, what shall we call it? Shake, rattle, and roll Uranus, wanting to, disrupt things enough that were thrown off kilter as to what it is we thought was going to happen, as Uranus is trying to wake us up by that shaking of things that we thought were going so and so. And this moon feeling into that is like, something is off kilter here. And you throw that together with that Mars-Pluto dance and that Neptune potential seed being planted into the new Earth. There's a reckoning. There's attempting to get a hold of our attention and asking us, are you ready to change? Uranus, the planet of dynamic, sudden change, is in this mix on this Mars Tuesday day of this week. Those are the main planetary things that I wanted to bring up for this week. The last one is going to be Sunday. On Sunday, our moon down here at 9 degrees of Leo is going to actually be at 13 degrees of Leo when it opposes the sun in our next full moon. Maximum reflected light upon what it is that we are considering from the version of Leo ruled by the sun. So this dynamism of a full moon in the sun sign of Leo is reflecting back that Aquarian perspective. Are you tuned into an effective enough way to enhance the experience of the community, of the tribal core of who we truly are as human beings, sent here by Spirit to grow in very magnetic, magical ways. That's it. I know I probably talked a little longer than normal, but the energies that this week are playing in my world are not of a minor consideration. You know, is it because my birthday's on Wednesday this week? Perhaps. But I think a bit more than that. I'm being tapped on the shoulder by Spirit all the time. And the energies that this week is driving me toward is to be the invitation to all of us to step up to the plate. Do something you probably haven't done before. You each will know what that is. Because I suspect that we are being called, every one of us, to recognize our specific position in the matrix of life. Right now, that we came with the medicine in this life to offer into the healing of this life experience. Thank you. See you all next week.